Welcome back to part two of, the sins of the bloodline and the generational curses. I had to abruptly stop the recording because it was going to cut off. And so I want to continue where I left off. I was, just giving you an overview of my background and how, the generational sins appear or the sins and the bloodline appear in each generation. And so, and how it comes down. And so I was just talking about my mother. I realized at an early age that something wasn't right in my family. And I didn't really know I didn't hear the word back in that time. It was 80s, early 80s. And in the late 70s, narcissism, I just knew something was wrong. And like my mother, um, it didn't appear to be any like mental health because she functioned well. She was a salon owner. I knew how to do hair at a very young age. In fact, after high school, I had my girlfriends come and I would do their hair. And so she let me have a little booth next to hers. And I used to stand on the, like a Coca-Cola crate. Remember how the Coca-Cola glass bottles came in the crate when they delivered them, like to stock her little Coca-Cola refrigerator at the salon. So, but she was she was very. I guess as I started to develop, and I developed at a very young age, I was very well endowed. I actually took after her, in that sense, and it seemed like she used to give me evil looks and just say like weird things that like I didn't something that you would get from a girlfriend and not your mother. And about her men, like as if like I was trying to catch their attention. And I'm like where is this coming from? It would make me afraid to like even come out of my room, but yeah, she was in like competition with me, and I started to notice that behavior around like the ages of 12, 13, 14, 15. But, as I gradually grew older, she gradually became very mean and competitive and just nasty towards me. And I was only good to be the babysitter, to look after my other siblings that were younger than I was. And but I had to grow up really fast. This lady was my first betrayer. She was the first person, like the rejection and all that stuff. And I realized this when I was healing from my childhood trauma. And so, this it is like the fingerprint of what you go through in life because you're not healed, And so that's just like narcissism. I was dealing with them like that spirit. Every relationship, it'd be the same spirit, but a different form or a different body. I was just wondering, like, I used to always think it was like I was just a magnet of attracting, you know, just bad men, that wasn't good for me, relationship wise. And but no, it's part of the healing. Like, God will allow this stuff until you learn, the patterns and the traits, and you learn from this and don't and know not, set boundaries and not select these type of men in your life. So, but like I said, I had to grow up really fast, due to her irrational behavior and actions. She kicked me out, and it wasn't the first time. It's like she got a kick out of me, like needing her. But yeah, I'm a kid. I'm ninth, 10th grade. Actually, eighth grade is when it started. And like she would sit in the window and just like watch me, like with this smirk. And now I know that's that demonic entity that's, resides in her that was doing that, causing her to act in that way. And sadly enough, she didn't heal before she died. I just pray that, she was repentive and she, is in heaven. But oddly enough, this time when she did it, I didn't. I didn't go knock on that door. I didn't sit on that porch. I just had enough. I was trying to find ways, like strategize a way to get my clothes out of her house because I know I needed. I was still thinking, I got to go to school. I got to go to school. But she wanted to crunch me or hurt me so bad that she wouldn't even do that. And like I wasn't about to like reach out to family because I wasn't really close to that side of the family. I was closer to, my family back in Detroit, like my dad's people and, my grandmothers and stuff there. I didn't really know her people, and they have that narcissistic type of behavior, very judgmental. Everything she does, they would see it but wouldn't do anything about it. They even treated me really bad as well. So I didn't want to go around them, even like my big mama, I was not dark and not light. My mother could pass as if she was a Latina woman, and not so much as white, but she was very fair skinned, light, with soft texture of hair. And I wasn't. I took that after my dad. And so in the South, that's kind of frowned upon, the dark skin. And back in those days, then I had a little gap tooth, and I was called ugly. Even my big mama and them, like I hated going to visit when she would drop me off because not only my cousins would treat me nasty, these grown adults would do the same thing. But now it all makes sense. It's this generational curse. So I don't know, maybe one of them sacrificed me. God hasn't revealed that to me, but yeah, but anyway, back to her. I didn't want to like be around her ever again in my life. She made me like I was drained and depressed, and that was that spirit that was attached to her that was doing that to me. So, but I didn't think about how my future would pan out or how I would survive. I was still trying to go to school every day, because that's how you think at that age. So I was only 16 and still in high school. In fact, the day she put me out, that next day I was turning 16. I was 15 when she kicked me out. And just things just got scary and really fast. And all the while, I didn't realize, yeah, God was still had His hand on me. He was always there. And referring to like, the present when I moved back in 2020 to Atlanta, you know, back then, with my friends, they used to, I was ghosted by family members, by my friendships, relationships when I didn't, do what they say or how they thought I should live my life or do. And I had matured from these people. Like, I realized that as I was sitting and chatting with them over, a cup of coffee or lunch or dinner, the conversations, we didn't share the same sentiment. And, but I didn't say anything about it. I just knew, thought to myself, we no longer shared the same mindset. So, and we were in our like when I moved back, I was in my mid 50s, and so for you know all of us, including them, we are mature. We physically, but not all of us are you know um, in our mindsets. Some of them still behave as young adults. For instance, while I was there, one of my best friends, at least I thought she was, it's only two, the one who stranded me and this one. And they were still pretty tight, throughout the years because they still stayed there in Georgia. However, this girl contacted me, heard I was in town, wanted to catch up, was having a her birthday little dinner event. And then she goes into telling me how her now best friend is like been in a relationship with my son for almost a decade, with my son's father. And I'm like, so I knew this was the main agenda. It wasn't to catch up with me. It was just, and I was just like, it was unexpected and very hurtful because in 30 years, this is what we're doing now. And I was already faced with all these other adversities, from this difficulties from witchcraft, attacks and attacking me. And so I just knew, like, I didn't see any evidence of God in these individuals. And in that moment, I just knew that I honestly wouldn't mind if I ever interacted or seen these people again. I disconnected and distanced myself immediately, and including some of my relatives. But I wouldn't go back around them either unless it instructed by God, similar to like Joseph in the book of Genesis. His brothers did him dirty, and he was hurt after all those years when he came face to face and they didn't even know who he was. But he's in his heart, he still had love for them, genuine, pure love, because those were his family, especially his dad and his youngest brother. I think they shared the same mother who had passed away, giving birth to the youngest son. But it was written, this was, and a part of his purpose was to get to where he was as, under you know, Pharaoh, and he was royalty. He was able to provide for his entire bloodline, and so yeah. Unless God instructed me to, I don't care if I don't. And it's been 5 years since that interaction with everyone, family, friends, and foes. But I know you may wonder why I'm sharing this part of my life. I think the Lord knew that it was relevant. Some people, they fear your growth and your success, and especially those who don't have a genuine, you know, heart about seeing you do well in your life. And they try to undermine and manipulate you regardless of where you've been and what you're doing. And it kind of reminds me of the Ephesians 6 and 12, where it states, we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against spiritual wickedness and principalities. And it highlights how the enemy can use people. He will use those closer to you, even within your family, your bloodline, to carry out, Satan's evil agenda on that family, on that bloodline, on you, and his evil intent with his evil intentions. And so it's written. It is all written before we enter the womb. Sadly enough, some of us don't live long enough to understand what God's plan is for us, and many simply just give up, because it's not for the weak. And while others become overwhelmed by the desires of this world as a result, they allow Satan to gain legal authority in their lives, to operate in their lives. Whether, he have you still having a taste in your mouth for drugs, or, still wanting to fornicate, knowing you ain't supposed to be sleeping with anyone that you're not married to, or adultery, sleeping with somebody else's husband, and, bringing kids in the world. A lot of that stuff happened in my family. And yeah, I remember hearing stories about my great grandmother on my mother's side, the one who I didn't like going over her house as a kid. She used to hit me with the switches because, I would ask a lot of questions, and questions that she didn't want me to know, but I was a little different. And then I wasn't raised around them. So, I was definitely different, and dark skin and really thick, coarse hair. with a gap tooth, I was considered ugly to them. The light skinned cousins and stuff were adored and treated differently, And so she would travel back to the deep south where she was originally from, like in the movie Ray, like in the deep south where the shacks and stuff like that. And she would go down there to see this lady. Her name was Mother Walker. Yeah, she was a root worker. And she went to resolve like legal issues and, marital issues for my uncles. Yeah, she always favored the men in our family more. I saw that as a young, but my mother used to talk about it too. But I really, as I got older, and and I could like piece things together. Yeah, it made sense. But yeah, so I overheard a lot of stories, many stories of this lady, and this might explain why my life has been in turmoil because due to the generational curses, maybe just a part of it, I don't know. God instructed us never, we have to separate from those type of places. He says we are not to engage in evil or harm others. So whether you dabble in any form of sorcery or somebody in the bloodline, like just simply visiting spiritualists or root workers or obeah, whatever your culture is. It's a different name for every culture. Nowadays they, tarot card readings. They even do it online, especially on YouTube and TikTok. So you're not supposed to participate in these practices. They may not seem harmful, but you are still opening the door for curses to enter your life, your children's life. It affects your entire bloodline for many generations to come. And whoever that curse breaker is, it is tough. Telling you, my whole life changed. Not only my life, my appearance. Like it's long suffering for real. And so I would just advise people like now straighten up. Get right with God and get your kids. Let them understand who God is, whether and going back to friends and family who do you wrong, from the past or present. Whoever wished you harm or pain or any failure, just wish them well. Continue to achieve and move forward in your life, and just remember that God loves you. He loves all of us, and you don't need to prove anything to anyone except yourself and God. He no matter what your flaws or what you've done in the past, he's just waiting for you to come to him. Satan, he seeks to control us, aiming to keep us in an emotional state of people pleasing or pleasing others in any way, even men, and explaining yourself all the time. It's a part of manipulation and control. And even if you're experiencing or had in the past and sometime in your life slander, gossip for no reason, smear campaigns against you, you need to know that that's form of witchcraft. So don't participate in it either. Even if you listening to the gossip, you participating in a form of witchcraft. Sorcery is not good. It's a sin. And if you have, repent from that. I don't engage in anything that's not meaningful, any conversations that's not meaningful, and so these words, they essentially are curse words. We say cuss. And so and many people are aware of that. They unaware, I'm sorry, of the power of their words. And yeah, and you have other people who are intentionally doing it, which brings me back to like my one of the part one of the Miami video that I did. I have to get to part two, where those demons were chasing me down, and like all I did was loss after loss after loss, and not understanding that verse where God says, "My sheep know my voice," because I let the voice of Satan lead me to Miami. I wasn't supposed to be there. It got really bad for me. So that I'll be doing that video next to continue what happened. And I'm almost done. I'm almost to the part where, and if you listen to any of my videos, it may not seem like anything, but I'm still getting through all of that. I'm still trying to find a way. So God is saving me. It is only the power of God, where I tell you I was passing out when I drove from New York to Atlanta, to my home state. I was scared to drive anytime I felt faint, because I didn't know. I used to have when those faint spells, or when I'm passing out, I fractured my nose twice, broke it once, busted my lips, my teeth, loosened them. Like that was the spirit of death chasing me down that they were sending, doing graveyard spells. So all in all that time, God was saving me. He had a hand over me, and so yeah. People know what they're doing. And so in that video, I was talking about my girlfriend from New York, that when I got to New York and I was running in this circle. It's one of my Latin girlfriends, Puerto Rican girl, how all of a sudden she appeared back in my life after some years ago, like decades. And she was an agent of Satan, and her family was into that Santeria. And all of this came back to life when I'd never paid it attention. And this is how Satan used people. I'm telling you. So, just people must possess a certain level of wickedness or dark, sinister personalities to want to harm another person for no real reason at all. And personally, if I disliked someone or simply chose not to engage, you know, um, with them for whatever reason, I would just avoid talking to them, or, talking about them, and just focus on my own life. I don't understand why people, but it's a monitoring spirit, and a lot of them they're not aware that this is happening to them. So, but now that I understand my calling, it has become increasingly challenging for me to be around people. I've been blessed with the ability of wisdom and discernment, which allows me to perceive people's true intentions and their heart posture towards me. I've learned to just enjoy my own company, mind my business, and keep to myself. A lot of people be acting like they know your life better than you do. So, God used me not only to be to break this generational curse in my family, which has a history of addiction, um, adultery, poverty, but also to combat other struggles such as like same-sex relationships and a plethora of other issues that these demons seek to keep in our bloodlines. We've even experienced an unexplained illness that typically do not affect other cultures. They usually don't affect people of color, other than when I say other cultures. It only shows up in the European bloodline. This is what the doctors say. So, yeah, there's a reason why God will choose you to do this. You don't even have to sign up for it, because I didn't. It's not for the weak. It's hard. It is long suffering for real. But yeah, Satan wants to keep us in this cycle to cause premature death, to keep you in sinful lifestyles that threaten your soul. So talk to your children about God. Proverbs 22:6 says, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. So I pray that you and your loved ones are all healthy and doing well, and that God gives you the peace and joy that you desire. God bless you all. Thank you for listening. Stay tuned to the part 2 of the Miami video. It's coming. Thank you. Bye bye.